Ms. Costello, I'm concerned about redundancy of acquisition. We've got the intelligence community, we've got the commercial satellite community, we've got the Air Force, we've got now the Space Force, we've got Space Command. Talk to me about rationalizing the acquisition process to be sure that we're maximizing the benefit and minimizing the cost.
So acquisition authorities start from, in our case, the Secretary of the Air Force. And they roll down right now through the acquisition executive, currently SAF AQ. At the point at which we have a second SAE, by law right now, October 1 of 22, those authorities will go down two pathways, but not all authorities. Certain authorities are limited to one person within a service. So we're working through some of those details to make sure we have the right efforts in the right support mode for when we stand up the new Assistant Secretary of the Air Force.
And isn't there
Space
an acquisition executive council or something like that? Is that up and running? Will that help in this regard?
There's a Space Acquisition Council that has been stood up, and right now I am chairing that until there's an Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for space acquisition and integration. At their arrival, they will then chair that forum. And that does bring all of these groups together to talk about force structures and issues going on so that we can align our efforts and not duplicate, certainly not duplicate programs and not duplicate technology efforts that are going on, align our budgets better, get on a similar roadmap. That will be very helpful.
And a huge part of the development in space now is commercial. To what extent do we piggyback on commercial space activities? It seems to me if we want to do a GPS satellite and Amazon or somebody else already has one up there, can we save the taxpayers' money by utilizing commercial satellites?
Absolutely. Our Space and Missile Center is very actively involved with startup companies, industry, commercial. They have their Space Enterprise Consortium of about 500 companies, many of which are almost all, 70 to 80%, are not traditional space providers. And they get ideas from there. They get their innovation. They're able to use that maybe to develop prototypes, test things out. So they're actively working with industry and also working with our international partners in order to figure out where we can leverage what they're doing too, because we don't need to duplicate there on many capabilities.
Well, it's also a strategic advantage. A lot of small satellites are harder to take out than one big one. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Depending on the mission and what you're trying to accomplish. We are at a point where we have so many tools in our toolbox right now that we have that flexibility, and that's what we talk about, picking the right path for providing the capability. It's not just the old traditional one way to do an acquisition program. What is it we need to do there? Should it, and the disaggregation that is going on enables us to do some things as prototypes, some things as major programs if it makes sense, some things as just software pathway, and then also doing partnerships with our international allies and
I agree with Senator Tuberville. I think this is a ripe area for partnerships and spreading the burden to some extent to those who will be benefiting by this architecture. Mr. Hill, nobody wants to talk about offensive weapons in space. However, is it necessary to have a capability that will deter our adversaries from exercising offensive weapons against our satellites? In other words, our whole national security strategy is rests upon deterrence. And do we need to develop capabilities and communicate them to our adversaries in order to have an effective deterrent?
Senator King, first, the thing about the weapons, of course, whether it's offensive and defensive is often in the intention of the user. One person's act of defense is another person's offense, for example. The ability to assure a capability, to deny somebody the benefit of attacking a capability is part of a deterrence. The ability to impose costs on someone else if they take action is also part of a deterrence. And it gets to understanding what is important to someone else. to the adversary, that the aggressor you're concerned about. If their capability in space is really not that important to them, then there's not particular deterrent value in holding it at risk. But if taking down our space capability is very important to their military strategy, then assuring our military capability in space may be very important to our deterrence calculus. Figuring out these pieces of where does the space domain fit into the totality of deterring aggression is one of the key questions that we have to work on with the new organizations that Congress.
When I was in Colorado Springs and having these briefings, the first thing that came into my mind was that this is literally 3D chess. We are dealing in a three-dimensional process of defense and countermeasure. Senator Fisher.